Hey fellas, how's it going? Today we're going to talk about Batman. More specifically, we're going to talk about Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale's Batman trilogy, which includes Batman Haunted Night, Batman The Long Halloween, and Batman Dark Victory. All stories that take place relatively early in Batman's career, around the time costumed villains were starting to replace old school mobsters. While The Long Halloween was the most influential of the three stories we're going to talk about today, serving as a loose source of inspiration to the legendary Dark Knight film, I believe Haunted Night and Dark Victory are just as good, if not better, than The Long Halloween. So without further ado, let's get started. So the black sheep of this family is Batman Haunted Night. It's actually an anthology series of Halloween one-shots, originally published in the Legends of the Dark Knight series. But it is because of these three issues' popularity that Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale were able to make The Long Halloween and Dark Victory in the first place. And later editions of the anthology collection have marketed Haunted Night as the prequel to The Long Halloween, even though it is in no way written like a prequel to that story. It's divided into three sections: fears, madness, and ghosts. Very spooky, very Halloween-y. The first story, Fears, revolves around Scarecrow and his gang causing mass blackouts across Gotham City, destroying several power relays so that they can loot and rob to their heart's content, with the B-plot of Bruce Wayne being catfished by a Black Widow murderer, a woman who marries rich men and kills them for the inheritance. The general theme of this issue seems to be free will versus fate, specifically Bruce feeling like he was chosen to become Gotham's protector, that the city took his parents like a tribute or a sacrifice in order to forge Bruce into her greatest champion, although he ultimately comes to decide that he made the choice himself to become Batman, which leads pretty well into our next story, Madness. This story bringing Batman up against the Mad Hatter, in my opinion a criminally overlooked Batman villain. While Fears paralleled Batman and Scarecrow's use of fear tactics and costumes, Madness parallels Jarvis Tech and Bruce Wayne's megalomania, their obsessions with their alternative personas. Since at this point in the trilogy of one-off issues, and I do believe they form enough of a three-act structure to be called a trilogy in their own right, Bruce has fully accepted the mantle of Batman, neglecting his responsibilities and roles as Bruce Wayne at this point. So while he spent much of the first story, Fears, questioning his role of Batman and whether or not he could give it up, he has gone too far in the opposite direction during the events of Madness. And this is contrasted with Jim Gordon living his double life as high-ranking police officer and father of two, since he and his wife recently adopted their niece Barbara, who, after an argument with Jim, runs away and ends up getting abducted by the Mad Hatter. And in a sense, this is foreshadowing Batman's future relationship with the first Robin, Dick Grayson, which is explored in Dark Victory. Also, for those of you who don't know, in the post-Crisis to New 52 timeline, Barbara Gordon was not Jim Gordon's biological daughter like she is in other continuities. This retcon was introduced by Frank Miller in Batman Year One, although even up to the events of Flashpoint, a lot of writers seem to forget that. Not that it really matters, they have a proper father-daughter relationship as it is. But this story is really the only one I can think of that explores how hard it is for the two to adapt to their new life, since Jim already feels guilty raising his own child in Gotham City, let alone somebody else's. And the fact that his conflict with her put her in direct danger basically puts Jim on the warpath, ending with him literally throwing himself through a window to save Barbara from the Mad Hatter, hammering home how you can be a driven protector of the people while still having a family life of your own. And if there was a single image I feel really summarized this story, it's this one right here. Batman looking into a broken mirror with a hole in his chest, implying that there's a missing piece to him, the love of the people that are in his life. As the Dr. Leslie Thomas, who once worked with Thomas Wayne, and Alfred are both people who still care about Bruce deeply. People who have been trying to help him move on ever since his family were killed. People he has continued to push away. And in this story, we also learn that Batman has a particular hatred for the Mad Hatter. He views his whole gimmick as the Alice in Wonderland character as an infringement or a bastardization of his happy childhood memories, as his mother read him the book Alice in Wonderland the night she was killed. I would say that this is a little on the nose. Maybe it could have been something she's been reading to him over the course of the last week or so. Not everything has to be tied to the night his parents were killed, but that's just a minor gripe. The third and final story included in Batman Haunted Night is called Ghosts, and it's a loose adaptation of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, where the role of Marley is played by Bruce's father, Thomas Wayne, whose spirit is apparently weighed down by the responsibility he took on by being a doctor. A responsibility that often took Thomas away from his family, so much so that he is apparently regretting how often he responded to emergency calls from the afterlife. And he warns Bruce that if he doesn't find a balance between the Bruce Wayne and Batman personas, he too will be weighed down by the chains of his life choices when he dies. And he warns Bruce that 3 more ghosts will visit him this night, and I'm sure you understand where the story goes from here. Everybody has made an adaptation of A Christmas Carol at this point, and I know of at least one other Batman A Christmas Carol adaptation called Batman Noel. And the spirit of Christmas past takes the form of Poison Ivy, and she makes it very clear to Bruce that she is not the real Pamela Isley, that she is in fact a spirit that has borrowed her form. And one of the interesting things about this story is every time Batman interacts with one of these spirits, he is wearing his costume even though he's supposed to be in his pajamas. I guess to reflect how Batman has essentially taken over his inner spirit, or to reflect how Batman is his real spirit now. And she takes him back to a Halloween night where Thomas Wayne broke one of the promises he made to Bruce and found himself unable to take his only son trick-or-treating. And instead of accepting the olive branch offered by his mother and going trick-or-treating with her, Bruce decided to stay home in an angry protest. I'm not really sure the right word to use in this context. And of course, the next ghost to visit is the Ghost of Christmas Present, played by the Joker in this story, who shows Bruce how much he frightens the children in his neighborhood. His dark, seemingly abandoned house serving as a backdrop for local urban legends and ghost stories, and how his obsession with his Batman persona is inadvertently hurting his parents' legacy. And I have to break away to say I love the way Tim Sale draws the Joker. His smile is so wide it looks painful, and the way the spirit's sadistic grin lingers like the Cheshire Cat. Chef's kiss, man. This is top-notch imagery here from Tim Sale. Give the man a round of applause, please. Last but not least, we have the Ghost of Christmas Future, which is always meant to be an undead version of the protagonist, who typically shows the Scrooge or Scrooge analog their grave, the last and most dire warning that they need to change their ways. And I have to say, seeing that skeletal face peering out from the Batman cowl, it's probably one of the best images in this entire story, and this book is full of great imagery. This is good stuff, man. Don't sleep on Batman Haunted Night. And the story ends with Bruce finally accepting the olive branch of friendship offered by Lucius Fox earlier in the story, the two agreeing to work together and build the Wayne Foundation to honor Thomas and Martha. And the very last page of the whole volume is Bruce finally opening up Wayne Manor to trick-or-treaters, showing that Bruce can live the double life as the billionaire playboy and the Batman vigilante. Excuse me, he's constantly referred to as a millionaire in this story, which really hurts me. It just really highlights how the inflation here in America is worse than pyrocynical search history. Ultimately, Batman Haunted Night is well worth a read. From this killer first page, you can get a good glimpse of the creative panel layout the stories will use moving forward, the use of silhouettes to conceal characters' faces, and we even get to see the Scarecrow use his fear toxin on crows to scare them. He's literally doing what's in his name, guys. I feel like we just need to give him a free pass on this one and let him do what he's gonna do. Each of the 3 stories in Haunted Night are well worth reading on their own, and together form a pretty solid 3-act structure. Batman fully embracing his role, Batman getting lost in his role as Gotham's protector, and Batman coming to terms with the fact that he can be both Gotham's protector and the living legacy of his family. There's just enough in here that's dark and mature to keep an adult reader engaged, and I'd probably say that it's not too dark to alienate children readers. So if you're a parent like I am, and you're looking for a Batman story that a kid might enjoy, this one probably wouldn't be a terrible suggestion. I would definitely recommend it over something like The Long Halloween, since we see a lot of just point-blank murders in that graphic novel. So yeah, Batman Haunted Night stands on its own well enough that it really doesn't need the long Halloween prequel branding it seems to get in modern re-releases. It's a solid story that anyone could read at any time. So for a very long time, The Long Halloween has stood shoulder to shoulder with some of the greatest Batman stories ever told. Put on lists of essential stories alongside The Dark Knight Returns, Batman Year One, and The Killing Joke. And in many ways, The Long Halloween deserves its reputation among the greats. It is, in my opinion, the definitive origin story of Two-Face. It was a massive event in comic books back in 1996 and 1997. Not that I was really conscious of that at the time, since I would have been 2 or 3. But the point is, The Long Halloween has always been considered one of the greatest Batman stories ever told. It's just not a very good mystery story. Because ultimately, the final twist of the story makes zero sense. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. You see, The Long Halloween is often referred to as the unofficial Year 2 of Batman, as a lot of elements of Frank Miller's Batman Year 1 carry over into this story, including the appearance of Carmine Falcone, who still has the scars across his cheek from when Catwoman slashed his face, and his continued place of prominence at the head of Gotham's underground, his position finally being threatened by the freaks of Gotham City. The one in particular attacking his forces being known as Holiday, or the Holiday Killer. A gunman cleverly hidden in fog and shadow, concealing their identity with an overly large coat and a wide brim hat, wielding a .22 caliber handgun with the serial number filed off, a baby bottle nipple used as a makeshift suppressor, and leaving a calling card in the form of cheap trinkets related to the holiday of the killings, creating what amounts to an investigative dead end for the police officers of Gotham City. Not that they're horribly heartbroken at the mobsters taking each other out. The first victim of the new homicidal maniac in Gotham being Johnny Vitti, the nephew of Carmine Falcone, the son of his only sister. A man Carmine Falcone himself once tried to have killed in prison so Johnny couldn't testify against him in court, causing a rift to develop between the Vitti and Falcone crime families of Gotham and Chicago respectively. And the hit was so expertly carried out, everyone assumed it had to be a mob insider, a true professional. Somebody who could get into Johnny Vitti's personal apartment without causing a scene. Somebody who would have had to have been trusted enough by Johnny Vitti's own subordinates. Remember that, please. It will be very important later when we talk about why the final twist of this story just plain doesn't work. Meanwhile, we see for the first time the trifecta of Harvey Dent, Jim Gordon, and Batman coming together, all with the shared goal of bringing down Carmine Falcone, also known as the Roman, head of the, quote, Roman Empire crime family. And from here I have to assume you're all at least familiar with who Harvey Dent is in Batman lore. More importantly, that he becomes the Batman villain Two-Face. And we get to witness his slow decline from Gotham City's hotshot crusading district attorney and loving husband into this cynical shell of a man, openly wondering if Holiday isn't doing the city a favor by eliminating the scumbags, the Falcone crime family, and openly contemplating if justice really boils down to something as simple as the flip of a coin. And Falcone immediately suspects that it's Harvey Dent who is the Holiday Killer, mostly because the story opens up with Johnny Vitti's wedding, and Harvey Dent gets caught by Falcone's goons trying to sneak in to get evidence. So pretty much everybody suspects that it was Dent who whacked Johnny Vitti. The only other real suspects at the time being Catwoman, who always seems to be showing up whenever Batman is going after the Roman, and Falcone's chief rival Sal Maroni, whose father actually one time attempted to kill Falcone when he was a teenager. And it was none other than Thomas Wayne who saved his life. Because the only accurate portrayal of Thomas Wayne as an altruistic doctor, with his biggest flaw being his inability to separate himself from his work. Not the scumbag, billionaire, chief manipulator modern DC seems hell-bent into turning him into. But I digress. Falcone actually attempts to have Harvey and his wife eliminated after the assassination of his nephew, in an attempt to appease his relationship with his sister over the loss of her only son. although the attack is also in retaliation for Harvey Dent and Batman destroying the Falcone family stash of unlaundered money, which is a felony, by the way, the defacement or destruction of United States currency. And yes, this scene was cited as direct inspiration for the Dark Knight scene where the Joker burns his money before going on his speech about how Gotham deserves a better class of criminals. And while I can't trace the exact source, apparently Christian Bale has confirmed that Jeph Loeb's version of Batman was a huge inspiration to him as an actor when playing the role. And there is another almost immediate Dark Knight parallel we can transition into talking about. And that's the Joker's role in this story in general. He's basically threatening to kill everybody in Gotham City until the Holiday Killer is caught or killed. Kind of like how in The Dark Knight he's threatening to kill a new person every day until Batman is arrested or reveals his identity to Gotham City. It's a small parallel, but it's definitely there since Joker isn't really a major player in this story. Although he is one of the first non-Mafia members to jump on the Harvey Dent is the Holiday Killer bandwagon, threatening him directly to his face on Christmas Eve. Now, before I progress, there's a few other characters I need to cover real quick. The man in the shadows in this panel right here is Alberto Falcone, Falcone's youngest son and sort of his shadow throughout the story. He's kind of like Michael Corleone, where he was the son who was expected to go legitimate, the one sent to the fancy schools to get away from the family's life of crime. There's Sofia Falcone Gigante, Alberto's sister and Carmine's daughter, a hulking bruiser of a woman whose intellect is often underestimated by her enemies, and she takes over the role of her father's bodyguard after he's killed on Christmas Eve, and was incarcerated in the beginning of the story. And Carla Vitti, Carmine Falcone's sister and the matriarch of the Vitti crime family of Chicago. And let me tell you, these two take sibling rivalry to a whole new level, both openly threatening to kill one another at multiple points in the story. And most of Batman's typical rogues gallery is also around, including Batman running into Solomon Grundy in the sewers. And the reason I'm singling him out is because he's actually not originally a Batman villain. Solomon Grundy is actually an enemy Batman inherited when he became Gotham's protector, and was originally the rival of Alan Scott, the Golden Age Green Lantern, the one who had a magic ring and not a piece of alien technology. And I would really have to kick myself if I forgot to mention that we get to see Scarecrow and the Mad Hatter play off of each other. I don't think I mentioned this in the Haunted Night section of this review, but for whatever reason, Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale's version of Scarecrow speaks in nursery rhymes. And since Mad Hatter almost exclusively communicates in Alice in Wonderland quotes, the two just have instant chemistry from the go. It's good stuff, well worth a read in my opinion. Plus, the reason they're working together is that they were hired by Falcone, so we get to see them bounce off of a more traditional mobster figure as well. I'm telling you, the mystery of the story might be utter trash, but the character work is fantastic. Well worth the price of admission. I hope they didn't ruin it in the animated movie adaptation. I don't know, I have no plans on watching it right now. On Christmas Eve, Carmine Falcone's bodyguard Milos Garappa was killed. A cheap trinket holiday snow globe left at the scene of the crime. Dollar store trash anybody could get for pocket change, especially back in the 90s. And while this death impacted Carmine Falcone, the next victim of the Holiday Killer really shook up the story. The death of Alberto Falcone, the youngest child of the Roman himself. Also, the only victim of the Holiday Killer whose corpse we never see on panel. While the Falcone family supposedly found a body to bury, we never see any of this as an audience. Anyone who has ever watched a mystery movie or TV show, red flags should be going up for you. And then the Gotham City coroner, the only victim of the Holiday Killer not directly associated with a crime family, the only one to confirm that the body the Falcone family buried was indeed the son Alberto, also just happens to end up a victim of the Holiday Killer. Now I know what you're thinking. Alberto Falcone had a motive, feeling overlooked by his father, not being welcomed into the crime family as his successor, the fact that he could have gotten close to every single one of Holiday's victims, the fact that he gets creepy foreshadowing panels like this that zoom in on his eyes and his blue-tinted lenses. It all makes sense that he's the Holiday Killer. And you're half right. You see, there were secretly 2 holiday killers the whole time, one of which would have to genuinely be in 2 different places at once for 2 different killings. And I guarantee you, given all of the clues that this story offers, you would not guess who it is. It's just a twist shock ending for the sake of having a twist shock ending. You see, the first 3 victims of the holiday killer were killed by Gilda Dent, the woman being monitored in the hospital on Thanksgiving after surviving a house explosion, somehow snuck out to commit a murder, and did so again on Christmas Eve while tending to Harvey after he was assaulted by the Joker, herself being medically required to use a wheelchair temporarily. This is by far the weakest part of the story. If they wanted Gilda Dent to be the killer, they could have found a better way to handle this. Her ability to just black ops stealth into Johnny Viti's apartment makes no sense. Her just being able to leave her hospital room when she'd be hooked up to monitors, again after being blown up, doesn't make any sense. They just wanted a twist that literally nobody could see coming, and it makes 0 sense. But all of that can be forgiven for this scene right here. The scene where Harvey Dent finally snaps. The scene where he finally embraces the Two-Face persona and kills Carmine Falco. Everything in the story was leading up to this. The mystery was just a plot device to get us to this scene, because this marks the end of traditional gangsters in Gotham. It's the end of an era, the death of the old guard, because after all, Gotham needs a better class of criminals. Harvey Dent's slow decline into darkness, the thing that made him a suspect in the first place over the course of this story. That is the heart and soul of Batman The Long Halloween. This is Two-Face's one bad day moment. And in my opinion, that is the biggest and most important takeaway of The Long Halloween as a miniseries. The corruption of the Gotham Protectors trifecta, causing a divide to grow between Captain Gordon and Batman as well. The latter having no idea if he can ever really trust anybody ever again. And the story also establishes Two-Face as a power player among the super freaks, as he not only makes friends with Solomon Grundy, but he also gets a small army of them together when he goes to take out the Roman. I just realized I need to stop saying super freaks because that means something else in a whole other context. YouTube's not gonna like that. They're gonna come to my house and bury me alive. Oh, and I forgot to mention, it was Salvatore Moroni who destroyed Harvey's face. He threw acid into it when he was on the witness stand in a trial. He had basically convinced Harvey that he was going to roll over on Falcone, but let's just say his relationship with Sophia is a little... and she was able to convince him not to testify against her father. And I have to say, Sophia Falcone is probably my second favorite character in this whole story. Two-Face would be the first. She's a good subversion of the mafia princess trope. She's big, she's not particularly pretty. She walks this line of being this unstoppable Terminator and this neglected child trying to earn her father's affection, but living in the shadow of her overachieving brother. And one of the funniest scenes in the entire graphic novel is when she almost pops the Riddler's head like a grape, like she's Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers. And after an unfortunate encounter with Catwoman, she ends up bound to a wheelchair in the sequel. She's a little bit clumsy and took a bit of a tumble out of her father's penthouse, and somehow survived a almost 100-story fall. I guess she was just built different. I also really enjoyed the relationship between Harvey and Gilda Dent. The two had a lot of natural chemistry in the story, and I really liked the way Jeph Loeb writes Harvey Dent and Two-Face in general, where even after his change, he never really lets go of his memories of her, so much so that he was actually immune to the seduction attempts of Poison Ivy, which does raise some questions because this story was canon at one point, but those are questions to cover another time. And the last thing I want to go over regarding The Long Halloween is Catwoman's outfit in this story. I never really liked it. The first time I actually saw it was as Catwoman's alternate costume in Batman Arkham City. Yeah, I was pretty old the first time I read this book. I don't know why it took me so long to find it. Like senior in high school level of older, 12th grade for those of you non-Americans. I always felt like she looked more like a gremlin than a cat in this outfit. But, you know, whatever. It's still a good story regardless. Even with its flawed mystery, I would go as far as to say that Batman The Long Halloween is probably in the top 5 Batman stories ever told. I don't know how to articulate this point any more than saying that there's just something special about the way Jeph Loeb wrote Batman, and to me has been the definitive version of the character for a very long time. And if more writers were able to write Two-Face the way Loeb did, there would be no debate that he is the best Batman villain. And we wouldn't have to deal with 117 Joker stories that are all the exact same. Overexposure is a major killer to characters like him. But before I move on to Dark Victory, I just want to talk about this one scene where Batman leaves out a plate of Thanksgiving food for Solomon Grundy in the sewers. It's just that nice little touch to remind you that Batman isn't just a psychopath in a mask beating people up. He's genuinely trying to make the world a better place in whatever way he can, even if that means just delivering a dinner for a literal zombie in the sewers. It's just a nice little touch of character. The kind of little moments you can really appreciate in a story like this. At least I can. I can't speak for you. Alright, so the reason I wanted to make this video was because I was curious to see if these books held up, to see how much I had changed as a reader and whether or not I could still appreciate them, and maybe share that with an audience who pass these books by. Or maybe they're also fans who just like seeing these old books brought back into the limelight. And I am very happy to say that in my opinion, Dark Victory more than holds up, and remains my favorite of the Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale trilogy. But the biggest flaw of this book is something I have to front load before I get into the review proper. This book does not stand on its own. It absolutely requires functioning knowledge of both The Long Halloween and Batman Year One. Any reader just jumping into this story will be lost from the very first page, which just happens to be Batman brutalizing Alberto Falcone, breaking both of his arms and actually leaving his right one permanently crippled. Batman overdid it. He vented his anger at suspecting that Harvey Dent was the holiday killer, his inability to solve the case on his own, and to some extent his own apathy at who the victims of the killings were, something he was actually called out on by the Roman himself in The Long Halloween. And straight off the bat, I have to say this story's use of the color red is fantastic. It shows how Batman is just wallowing in his anger, how he let a killer run wild for an entire year in his city, what happened to his friend Harvey Dent. He's angry and he's lashing out, basically brutalizing anybody who gets in his way in this story. But if The Long Halloween was the story of a good man's fall, and the way it affected everyone around him, this story is about stoic resolve and rising from the ashes, as both Bruce and Jim Gordon are at their absolute lowest points when this story begins. Jim's wife having taken their son and leaving for Chicago to stay with her relatives. Meanwhile, Bruce is actively sabotaging his relationship with Selina Kyle, which now that I think about it, I didn't actually bring up during the Long Halloween section of this video. But Bruce and Selina Kyle were dating. Sort of. And Catwoman was also offering Batman, adult playtime as well. So I always thought that the implication was that she knew who Batman was. But one of the reasons their relationship falls apart is the fact that he keeps standing her up to go out as Batman. And if she knew he was Batman the whole time, I guess she would also understand why he was constantly not being around. Regardless, Bruce is wallowing in his anger and it sabotages his relationship. He's even reaching a point where he's starting to push Alfred away. And Bruce is also starting to put up a wall between himself and Commissioner Gordon, partially out of fear of being betrayed by another friend, and partially because of the presence of the new district attorney, a woman by the name of Janice Porter, who is antagonistic to the idea of the Gotham Police Department using Batman as any kind of asset, and who is strangely sympathetic to the case of Alberto Falcone, fighting to get him a retrial so that he could be declared mentally incompetent to stand trial, and entered into the custody of his family, which now includes his brother Mario Falcone, who has returned from Italy. And Mario is the legitimate good egg of the Falcone family bunch. He is actively trying to legitimize the Falcone family name and business, and he believes part of that is rehabilitating his brother. Meanwhile, his sister Sophia has taken her place as the head of the Falcone crime family, swearing vengeance for her father over his grave at a candlelight vigil. as she was in the hospital when his actual funeral happened. She and the heads of 4 other crime families swear an oath to work together, as all of their businesses, legitimate and otherwise, are currently under attack. Their common enemy being Batman's Rogues Gallery, now expanded to include Mr. Freeze. Her alliance includes the sons of Sal Maroni, Umberto and Pino, who I believe do not know that Sophia was banging their dad behind their mom's back, although I doubt that would come up naturally in conversation, and I don't think it would be in Sophia's best interest to brag about it. Then there's Tony Zuko, the man most famous in Batman lore for being the murderer of Dick Grayson's parents, Dick Grayson being the real name of the original Robin in case you weren't aware, the one who grows up to become Nightwing, Lucia Vitti, Sophia's cousin and the daughter of Carla Vitti, her family actually lending some of their forces from Chicago, and this fella speaking some kind of alien language is known as Bobby Gazzo, the apparent best friend of Carmine Falcone, and his rough equivalent in Metropolis, which means he's probably on the payroll of Lex Luthor, and I'll just be honest, he barely shows up in the story moving forward. Oh, and for some reason, Selena Kyle and Mario Falcone are there too, despite the fact that neither of them are involved in organized crime. So I guess they were just there for hors d'oeuvres and coffee. Okay, there's an actual reason Selena Kyle's there, but we don't learn that until the end. And on top of the gang wars between Batman's villains and the Mafia, there's a new serial killer running around Gotham, this one targeting police officers using a noose, which raises a whole lot of questions about the logistics of how this all works. Like, given who the killer ends up being and how freakishly strong they are, I guess you could say that they break their necks quick enough that it's not actually just strangling them, but it's still such an impractical way to go about this, but I digress. The victims include a lot of old familiar faces like Commissioner Loeb from Batman Year One, who was basically forced to retire in disgrace after the events of that story. And between the events of the Long Halloween and Dark Victory, Gordon was actually promoted to commissioner, so he's currently occupying Loeb's old office. And Loeb basically warns Gordon that the chair has wheels for a reason, and that if he doesn't catch the cop killer terrorizing Gotham, he's going to lose his job, which at this point in the story is all Gordon even has left. Arnold Flass, who was Jim's first partner after transferring to Gotham from Chicago, probably the dirtiest cop in all of Gotham, who got the ass beating of a lifetime from Gordon after he got sick of his shit in Batman Year One. Yeah, I think I'm far enough into the video I can curse without YouTube jumping down my throat, right? I just gotta watch how many F-bombs I drop. And the chief of police in Gotham City, Clancy O'Hara, a Batman supporting character who actually dates back to the 1940s, I believe. He was the first of the Hangman Killer's victims, and established the pattern that every victim of the Hangman had a piece of evidence stolen from Harvey Dent's old files, making it pretty clear that somebody is trying to convince the police that Harvey Dent is the Hangman Killer. And as Harvey himself points out later in the story, it's a little too obvious. Alright, so there are way too many moving parts of this story for me to continue summarizing this with any level of clarity. It's just going to get confusing after a while, so I'm just going to skip into spoiler territory. Alright, boyos, it's time to buckle up. Sophia Falcone is the Hangman Killer. She was faking her paralysis the entire time. She didn't even fall all the way out of the penthouse. Catwoman's bolus caught her around the neck. She broke through a window, that's why she's bald now. The glass completely scalped her and scraped off most of her face. But her brother Mario was in Italy living as a plastic surgeon, and that's why it's mostly intact again. And all of the first killings were to basically erase Harvey Dent's legacy as a district attorney, killing off both of his old allies and enemies respectively, and even failing to kill Jim Gordon at one point. Two-Face leads the Batman's Rogue Gallery against the remaining heads of the Mafia families, eliminating all of them at exactly 2 p.m. because he's Two-Face and everything he does is in twos. Tony Zuko dies of a heart attack while being chased by Batman and Dick Grayson, so Dick gets to see firsthand how horrible it is to see another human being die, and decides to accept Batman's moral code that taking human life is wrong. We get to see Dick Grayson suit up for the first time, and Batman and Robin fight the entire Rogues Gallery. Long story short, Sophia Falcone takes her father's dying promise of burning Gotham City to the ground, before allowing Batman's Rogues Gallery to take it over literally, and almost blows up the entire city by damaging the gas lines, which draw the costumed villains out of their hiding place in the sewers. Dark Victory kicks all kinds of ass. The art is ratcheted up to a whole nother level, and frankly, I can't really separate Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale in my head anymore. The visuals and the writing complement each other so well that it's inseparable. And in my opinion, this is the way a superhero is supposed to look. This insanely physically intimidating force of nature. And revisiting these stories reminds me why I used to love comic books so much. How people who truly understand the medium can blend the writing and the visuals to just such a degree that they're inseparable. They're both so quintessential to the story that one would fall apart without the other. And like the title of the book implies, this is a Pyrrhic or bittersweet victory at its best. Harvey Dent is still gone. Everything he ever worked towards for making Gotham better is gone. All that's left is the murderer, Two-Face. Both Batman and Jim Gordon lost a good friend, and they have to live with this twisted phantom of the good man they once knew, wreaking havoc in their city. I also really love how this story goes into the rivalry between Two-Face and the Joker. It's something comic books haven't really explored in a long time. Okay, maybe I shouldn't say that because I haven't read modern Batman since early Rebirth era. Oh, and I didn't even mention the fact that the Riddler is in both of these stories. He plays so little of a role. The only one of Batman's villains he ever interacts with at any point besides Falcone is Catwoman. He just wasn't included in the bad guys club, and it's kind of funny. But at the same time, it's kind of sad to see him left out. He's also the only one to ever survive getting attacked by the Holiday Killer on April Fool's Day, where the killer literally just outlined him with a cartoonish amount of bullets that no .22 caliber handgun ever made would be able to carry. As much as it can kind of irk me, there's always a little bit of a funny innocence when people who clearly have no idea how guns work try to write stories revolving around them. Oh, and Janice Porter was banging Two-Face on the side the whole time. Not Harvey, she was specifically banging the Two-Face persona. And she was also playing Mario Falcone, who was very desperate to separate his assets from his sister's criminal assets. And Sophia suffocated Alberto, before going on to be killed by Harvey Dent herself. So he did technically finally bring down the Falcone crime family, and left poor Mario a broken shell of a man by the end. Seriously, this poor bastard didn't do anything wrong in this entire story, and he's probably the one who loses the most. Alright, final thoughts time. I would say all three of these stories are well worth a read on their own. If you're completely new to Batman, I would say Haunted Night is the best option to getting started. Just the dark and moody presentation of the characters, the creative comic book panel layouts. In my opinion, it's engrossing from start to finish, all killer, no filler. You definitely have to read Batman Year One before going into either The Long Halloween or Dark Victory to get all of the references. But I would say that The Long Halloween stands much better on its own than Dark Victory ever could. That's just the unfortunate reality of being a direct sequel to such a landmark event as The Long Halloween. And you also have to have an appreciation for the more stylized, cartoony elements of comic book art. If you're one of those people who was sort of spoiled by the pseudo-realistic style made popular in the early 2000s, this might be something you have a harder time getting into. But in my opinion, it all just blends so well together that these books are memorable despite their flaws. And when you consider the fact that The Long Halloween inspired the best Batman movie ever made, its place in Batman's history can never really be questioned, even if it is no longer technically canon, as the Batman New 52 arc basically retconned his entire origin, replacing Year One with a story called Year Zero for no reason. And I'm just going to stop myself there because I have very little of positive things to say about Scott Snyder's run as Batman's writer. And I have even less positive things to say about Tom King's run as Batman's writer. So those are topics to tackle for a whole nother time if I really feel like starting a shit show. After finishing this trilogy, I'm really yearning to go back and reread the Marvel Colors series. It was another joint project of Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale that revolved around Marvel characters dealing with loss. And while comic book characters whining about how much their life sucks is the norm in modern comic book writing for some reason, these stories share the same stoic resolve as the Batman trilogy I talked about. The idea that a hero is heroic because they overcome these tragedies, not because they sit around crying and wallowing in self-pity like they seem to these days. But I guess that's what happens when you hire YA writers instead of actual comic book fans to write your stories. And with all that said, I'd like to thank you guys for watching this video. I would appreciate any likes or comments you could give me, any critical feedback on how to improve my videos. I hope this was a coherent and comprehensive review, but I know I still have a lot of room for improvement. And if it seems like I left out a lot, it's because I still want people to go out and read these books for themselves. There's just a lot of good character moments that are worth diving into yourself. And I feel like if I picked apart every single detail, it would almost defeat the purpose of reading it on your own. And again, I don't want to guide you by the nose to any conclusions. I'm not that type of guy. Read these books, make your own opinions for yourself. That's what I say. And while I'm sort of branding this as part of my channel's reboot, it's more for my sake than anything else. I was just feeling kind of stuck in a rut doing what I was doing and seeing diminishing returns on it. So calling this all a reboot's more to get myself back in the right headspace to keep making my content. And again, hopefully I can start branching out into actually making my own original works instead of just talking about other people's. As much as I love to talk about stuff like this, stuff I really enjoy, I just kind of feel dirty talking about other people's creative works, not doing anything myself. You guys have a good one, you hear? Or else Pyrocynical's gonna break into your house and steal your balloons.